I want your soul to be prospering on the inside, God says, but I also want your life to be prospering. I decree and declare, as the subconscious conflict is cleared, as the need to prove and the need to compensate for something are cleared for you on every level, it all gets to flow in a way it never has for you before. There's a higher standard that is available and meant for you and possible for you. You can move through a moment, you can move through a season, but please don't get used to crisis. Please don't get used to lack. Please don't think that's how it has to be and just how life is. For somebody out there who has gotten used to insufficient funds, and you are all too familiar with those words and that feels normal to you, let this begin to reprogram your consciousness on every level. Self-sufficient, because God is your source. God is saying to somebody, hear me on this. I did not send that person into your life to trigger you. I did not send that into your life to taunt you, just to make you feel bad about something that you do not get to have. I sent them as a demonstration of what is possible for you. And you are not meant to be getting jealous of them. You are meant to be learning from them and being inspired by them. No matter what I do, more money comes in. No matter what I do, I can't help but prosper and increase. I am committed to say yes to every opportunity, every possibility, every vehicle, every avenue for abundance, every blessing that God has for me. Thank you, God, for the millions upon millions that will be made and received and circulated generously as a result of this teaching. That is all coming up on this episode of the Stephen Lovegrove Show. Welcome in, everybody. All things are possible for the one who believes. And you are the one. And I am so grateful that you are here and joining me today. In this episode, I'm going to be sharing with you a number of ideas, really an intersection of spiritual meets practical meets metaphysical ideas and principles that have utterly changed my life in the area of money and finances and wealth. And I will just tell you up front, the vast majority of what you're going to hear, the vast majority of what I'm going to be sharing today, you will not find this material in this way anywhere else on YouTube or on this platform or on another podcast, wherever you happen to be listening, because this is all born out of my life, out of my journey, out of my experience over the last 10 years in business, well before I had this community, much of it, well before I was ever holding this particular mic and recording this show and having partners all around the world. This is born out of what God has shown me, what I have learned, what I have mastered over the years, and I'm very excited to share it with you. But you are being warned. You have been warned. This is my caution. Do not proceed. Do not listen to this episode any further if you are not truly open for your money world to permanently change, because that will be the result of at least one of the ideas you take away from this today. So welcome, welcome, welcome in. If you are on YouTube, would you take a second to like this video? Make sure that you are subscribed to the channel and have those notifications on. If you are listening on a podcast platform, wherever that may be, Spotify, Apple, Amazon, etc., would you take a second to make sure that you are following the show over there? I appreciate that so much. And Of course, if you want extra credit and you would like to go ahead and just share this episode right away, even before we dive in, you are welcome to do that. I know some of you have been with me for a while and you already know that this episode is going to be epic, but if you're not quite feeling ready to share yet, I also get it, and that's totally okay. What I know for sure is that by the end of this episode, you will be wanting to share because of the light bulbs that have gone off, the aha moments that you have had, and the breakthroughs that these ideas have given you. As always, this episode is made possible by my amazing partners, the incredible and generous people who live all over the world that believe in this work and choose to support it and be part of this community in a deeper way. Thank you, partners. I have more gratitude for you than words can express, and you are on the top of my mind and my heart as I record this one today. I will mention, since at the time of this recording, it is a recent thing and it is new, but in case you're not aware and familiar yet, we have a Discord space that is available to all partners out there, and it has the best people and the best energy in it. We call it the Partners Prospering Portal, and I would love to have you in that space with us. Let me know if you are having any issues accessing that, because we want you in that space. And I also just wanted to mention as an example, because I thought it was fun, partners, when I was unlocking my phone to set everything up for the recording here, okay, this is an iPhone camera that's recording right now. And when I was setting things up, I had to enter my password. And obviously, for security reasons, I'm not going to share what it is, okay? But what I will say is, what I enter in every single time on my phone password is something very intentional and is something that I chose on purpose. It is something rooted in vision specifically for this community and for my partners. And I don't know if I've ever mentioned that piece in particular before, but I just felt led to mention today that even in the subtle little thing of unlocking my phone to record today, I was reiterating vision. I was returning to vision. I was going back to vision for you partners and for this community. And I wanted to share that really just for two reasons. One, so you know all the different ways that you are continually thought about and prayed over and blessed on a daily basis in my life, but also to hopefully inspire you that whatever it is you are holding the vision of, whatever it is you are desiring to create this year, whatever it is that you are believing for, you can give yourself these little reminders, these little reinforcements, these little opportunities to return to your vision again and again and again. So having shared all of that, this episode today is about money ideas that have changed my world, that have changed my experience with finances, that have changed this area of my life in a permanent and a powerful way. And I am fired up, okay? I am buzzing to record this one today. But right before we pray and get started, I just want to acknowledge here, this might be a polarizing episode, and I'm okay with that. I don't feel like I usually would say this at the top of an episode, but as I was praying over this one and getting ready today, this is the way I felt it is. There are going to be people that love this one, and there are going to be people that hate this one. And that's okay. I'm okay with that. But my prayer as I record today is that there is at least one idea here somewhere in this teaching, right? You've heard me say many times, all it takes is the one right idea to change your life. You don't need 70 ideas from a book. You don't need 70 ideas from a talk. You don't need 70 ideas from a podcast. And often we drown in information overwhelm and we just make our brain more confused and burnt out with all the knowledge we try to pile on. You just need so many times the one right idea, the one right message that God makes sure gets to you at just the right time, the one right next step that you are meant to take. And so my prayer today is that there is at least one idea here that makes a substantial difference in your life, no matter who you are, or whether or not we've ever met, whether or not you're familiar with me and my work in this community, whether you are personally worth 8 figures or more, or whether you have 8 different people and places and companies you owe money to today, or anywhere in between, wherever your financial standing is and however you got here, my prayer once again is that there is at least one idea here that would make a substantial difference in your life. So before we go any further, let's take a second and pray. God, who is my source, God, who is my shepherd, God, who is my friend, thank you for this beautiful, glorious day that you have made. Thank you for my partners. Thank you for this community. Thank you for every single person that is tuning in, listening, or watching right now. God, I turn this time over to you. I turn this particular teaching, this entire episode from start to finish over to you. Would you lead me, guide me, direct me, speak through me, move through me as I record right now? I pray that you would speak to every single person in a direct, individual, customized, personalized way. Would you even translate through the words that I say, however it's needed, so that they leave this space with the exact message, the exact shift, the exact idea that they needed. Thank you in advance for all the miracles that will follow from this teaching. Thank you, God, for the millions upon millions that will be made and received and circulated generously as a result of this teaching. I speak all of this in the name of the one who said, all things are possible for the one who believes. Together in agreement and in faith, God, we are the ones who believe. And so it is, and so we are. Amen and amen. Well, I'm ready. Give me a 1 in the comments on YouTube if you are ready. And as TD Jakes always used to say, get ready, get ready, get ready. If you're in the room with somebody, tell them get ready, get ready, get ready. If you want to have some fun in the comments, comment, get ready, get ready, get ready, because I can feel the power and the shift and the significance of this teaching today. It's not just that there's energy within it, though I do pray that you can feel my energy, my excitement, my frequency coming through the screen. But it's not just that there's energy in it. This is not just hype. There's life-changing ideas here. And I know the power of that. Now, here's my overall premise. Before we dive into the list of ideas today, here is my overall premise for this entire teaching, okay? And somebody write this down. Somebody please type this out in the comments for us. Most of you don't just need to think positively in this area. What you need is to think differently. Again, somebody please type this one out in the comments, and I want to just give us a moment to sit with this, to chew on it. Most of you don't just need to think positively in this area. You actually need to think differently. And I want to really take a moment because this is such an important distinction to me. It will not surprise you to know I am optimistic by nature. Faith is at the core of who I am, okay? This is not news. My core message for over 10 years now has been, all things are possible for the one who believes. So I am definitely team optimism. I am definitely team hope, as I talked about in the last Rave Church. I am definitely team positivity. So we're not anti-positivity here. That's not the point of this principle I'm starting with. But what I do want to say is, over these years that I've been in the coaching space, the personal development space, the spirituality space, it has become very clear to me that there are a lot of people out there who think positively, or who would at least say that they think positively, even in this area. And yet they're still broke, still struggling, still stuck in a cycle that they can't get out of. And so not with judgment, but with curiosity and compassion, at a certain point, any heart-centered leader who would be in this space long enough and observe that has to start to ask, what is going wrong? Where's the disconnect here? What is actually happening here? That we have people who, in some cases, are trying so hard, trying all these techniques, doing everything they know to do to think more positively, to think better, to think in a higher way, a higher frequency, specifically around this area, but they're still broke, they're still stuck, they're still frustrated. And I would submit to you, this is not a universal catch-all answer for every single person in every single situation, but I would submit to you one problem that I see, that I actually feel called to begin talking about today is there's a lot of people out there, and the issue is not that they don't think more positively or that they need to think more positively. The issue is they need to think differently about this area. And the tricky thing about this is, I cringe at how cliche it sounds to say it this way, but it's true. You don't know what you don't know, and you can't see what you can't see. And so some of you are stuck in poverty thinking and you don't even realize it. Some of you are stuck in thinking driven by trauma and you don't even see that. Some of you are stuck in a way of thinking that you learned from childhood, that you learned from parents or society, that you learned from the media, and the thinking is really not serving you, but you don't know any other way. And so I just felt led to begin today by acknowledging where I think there's a gap that we can close, and that I'm going to do everything in my power to close for you in a substantial way today is, this is not just about let's think more positively about money. Because some of you, in fact, I believe a lot of people listening, the gap that we need is not more positive, it's different. We need to think differently about money. And this would be a good moment to release any shame. This would be a good moment to release any sense of regret about how things have gone for you in this area in the past. This would be a good moment to release any self-judgment, self-criticism, self-attacking that your mind may have been doing in this area. It's okay that nobody taught you this. I'm with you there. It's okay that you didn't see it before. It's okay that you didn't know better. It's okay that you didn't know how. It's okay that your thinking was limited up until this point. But as we go through these ideas, I really want to emphasize today the shifts are not so much about let's just think positively. The shifts are about let's think differently. Let me know in the comments if that resonates with you and makes sense to you. Because, there's an ancient spiritual principle that says, whatever else you want to get wisdom, because wisdom is the principal thing. Now, let's talk about this in financial terms, and I don't want to make this overly technical or complicated, but we could say with an investment that there is principal and then there's interest. You begin with the principal, but then it grows. It's supposed to, right? That's the point. It increases. Over time, it accumulates interest. So ultimately, the goal is growth. The goal is increase. The goal is the number going up with interest over time. But before there can be interest, there must be a principle. And financial people out there who work in the industry, I'm sorry if I butchered any of those terms or didn't say it quite right, but there's this idea of the principle has to be there first. Before we can grow, we have to begin with the principle. And there's an ancient spiritual text, once again, that says, whatever else you're pursuing, whatever else it is that you want, whatever you desire, get wisdom first. Because wisdom is the principal thing. It has to begin there. And thank you and shout out to Dr. Mike Murdoch for really teaching this principle over the years and helping me understand. Look for the wisdom gap. Look for the wisdom that I might be missing. Look for the wisdom that has the key for me. Could it be, and can I suggest to you today that whatever feels like it's not working or that it's missing from your life, there might be a wisdom issue. There might be a wisdom gap. There might be an opportunity for more wisdom. And so again, I reiterate this because many of you, I know, have tried everything under the sun, everything you can find, everything you can think of to think more positively in this area. And yet, I really believe we had to start here today. What many of you need most is not just to think more positively. You're running into a ceiling there that you don't know what the issue is. You don't know how to cross, and thinking more positively is not going to do it fully. You need to think differently. And so I just want to encourage you. We're about to go into the list here, and I'm so excited about everything that's in my notes today, but I really wanted to take my time on that introductory principle before we dive into the list. And let me know in the comments if this part is speaking to you. But I really believe this is a takeaway for somebody in all areas of life, not just this one. Where is it that you might be limited by your own thinking? And the answer is not just be more positive, be more positive, be more positive. Could there be another area in your life where the key might be you need to think differently? And maybe as a community, we could just put a prayer out there for ourselves and for our community. God, would you show us where our thinking is holding us back? We are willing to see something new. We are willing to look at it in a new way. We are willing to think differently. And if you want to join me in that prayer, feel free to put it in the comments here. God, would you show me where I need to think differently and how I need to think differently, because I believe that applies to so many of us in so many areas of your life, and whatever it is that you want, whatever it is that you're pursuing, it begins with wisdom. Wisdom is the principal thing. So now I want to get into my list of ideas that have changed my money worlds forever. And number one is a basic. Number one is a faith 101 kind of principle. Number one is a foundational one that should not be new if you've been here for any length of time and is not going to surprise anybody. But please don't think it's frivolous. Please don't think it's a waste. Please don't skip over this one. It is number one for a reason. It is the foundation of all of these ideas. And idea number one is this: God is the source. I'm not in it alone. If you're taking notes, write that down, and somebody please type that one out in the comments for us with a timestamp. Idea number one that has changed my money worlds forever is God is the source. I'm not in it alone. You know, one time I had a client, now a partner, and shout out, you know who you are, ask me, okay, Stefan, I have a question about this God is the source thing that you say a lot. They said, here's my question. If there are so many people of faith out there in the world, and it really is true that God is the source, why doesn't it feel like it works for those people? And I think that's a fair question. I think it's a valid question. If there are so many people of faith out there in the world, and it really is true that God is the source, why doesn't it feel like all of those people are receiving very well? But I said to this individual, there may be lots of quote unquote people of faith out there. I don't disagree with that. I have no problem with that idea. But how many people out there really actually have this belief? I'm not talking about they believe in God. I'm not talking about they would consider themselves religious or spiritual. I'm not talking about that they would just nod their head and say, God is the source. That sounds nice. But in a very real way, how many people out there actually have this personal core belief that God is the source? And I would suggest to you, after talking to countless people, countless hours and sessions and conversations all around the world for the past 10 years, very, very few. Very, very few people, even if they would nod their head, even if they like the sound of this idea, even if they would be willing to repost or retweet it in some form because it sounds nice and sure, why not? Very few people from my experience actually have this as a personal belief in their own belief system that God is the source. And this is a little bit of a tangent, and this is going to be a whole separate teaching later this year, but there is this principle that only what you believe will you ever be able to receive. And I know that rhymes, so it might feel Dr. Seuss-esque, but somebody please type that out in the comments for us, because it is a spiritual principle. It is a timeless truth. Only what we actually believe will we ever be able to receive. Another way that we could say it would be only what we actually believe will we even let ourselves receive. And I plan to do a whole teaching, most likely later this year, perhaps in this spring, all about one ancient text that says the promise did not profit them because it was not mixed with faith. And there's so much I want to say, but I'm going to save it for that teaching. But let's just understand as we talk about idea number 1 today, if you don't begin with belief, there's no runway. There's no takeoff. It's not going to go anywhere. What you never believe, you will never let yourself receive. What you never believe, you will never experience. And so I would submit to you, even in a world where billions and billions of people consider themselves people of faith or religious or spiritual in some way, it has been my experience, very few people, even in those communities, actually have the belief that God is the source and God is my source. And this is important for so many reasons. There's a scripture and a promise that I love to quote in my stuff that says, trust God from the very beginning, and whatever you do will succeed. Whatever plans you make will prosper. But see, there's a key ingredient there that is not where most people begin, which is trust God from the very beginning. There's another ancient text and promise that I love to quote that says that God will meet all of your needs according to God's infinite supply. That is such an amazing truth. That is such an amazing, powerful idea when you really get it. But most people are not living in that truth. Most people are limited to their own supply. And one of the things I found over the years is that a lot of people invoke God last in this area, if at all, and usually only in crisis. See, my starting point, my core belief behind everything else, my foundation that I have to begin from is God is my source. I'm not in it alone. That's why we're starting there with idea number 1 today. But most people don't have that belief. Most people don't certainly personalize that belief. And from my experience, most people invoke God last, not first in this area, if at all, and usually only in crisis. Now, please hear me carefully. And hear my heart today. This is not the time to turn this off. Like I said, it might be polarizing. It might be confronting to some of us. It might be hard to hear in moments, but please stay with me so that this can really change your life in the best possible way. I really want us to get this on idea number 1 before we move further. because I really do think most people invoke God, if at all, last in this area, and usually only in crisis. You say, Stefan, what do you mean by that? How would I know if I was doing that? What does that look like? Well, it looks like this. For example, people create something, never checking in with that inner guidance, never getting still for a moment and listening, never asking God about it in any way whatsoever. They just go into something. And then when it gets messy, or when it starts to fall apart, or when it feels like it's not working or it's taking way too long, then they invoke God. Happens all the time. Another example of this, and why I say people invoke God last, if at all, and often only in crisis. They receive, and the numbers look good, things are up, things are going well, and in that place, people tend to believe, this is all my effort. This is all my hard work. If they're more spiritual, they might say, this is my vibration. This is what I've been being an energetic match for. This is all my manifestation. And so they're very proud of it. This is my success story. This is my hard work. This is my effort. And when things look good and everything's going well and the numbers are up, there is no recognition of a source beyond them. There's no giving, no tithing, no gratitude, no recognition, because it doesn't feel like there's any need for a source bigger than them in that place. They're just proud and the numbers look good and they have a success story to share. But then when receiving slows down, when the numbers fluctuate, when suddenly it doesn't look so good anymore, suddenly we have a lot of questions for God. And it's interesting to me, I can't help but observe this, that when things were up, when the numbers looked good, when you were in a season of success, you didn't believe it was God showing up for you there. But now that things have fluctuated, now that the numbers are down, now that it doesn't look so good, we want to blame God and we want to ask, why is God not showing up for me now? Couple more examples here. There are people who never really pray in the good times because it doesn't even occur to us. And success doesn't necessarily make you feel like you need to trust. And it might feel like, what is there to surrender when things are going well? But then, if an investment backfires, if someone takes advantage of you, if clients leave, if something happens and you don't know how you're going to make payroll this month, or your expenses are higher than they've ever been and it feels overwhelming, suddenly we find ourselves praying for the first time in a long time, for the first time all year. And it didn't occur to us to pray when everything looked good and the numbers were up and trust didn't even seem necessary. But now it looks different. Now it feels different. People suddenly think to pray. And I just wanted to give some examples here, and please understand, I am sharing all of this and speaking to all of this with zero judgment and 100% love and support. And I want you to know, every scenario, every pattern, every energy that I just spoke to, I will raise my hand first and say, I can relate. I have been there, done that, felt that, learned the hard way, learned through experience, and that's why I can speak to it. And so I am speaking to it today with no judgment, with no shame whatsoever, only love and grace and possibility. But do you see what I mean? I pray those examples are helpful, and I pray that if I'm not articulating it well, that God can translate, God can speak through me. Do you see what I mean? That most people invoke God last in the process, in their journey, in this equation, if at all, and only when they're in crisis. And what that tells me is we don't really operate from a core belief that God is the source and God is my source always, always, always. What that tells me is we want to somehow invoke a different power, a different principle, a different energy suddenly because we're in crisis. And now I feel like I have blame for God. And now I feel like God is not coming through. And now I feel like, God, where are you? And this is your fault and you should be fixing this. But God was never invoked. And this truth was never a belief of yours before. It wasn't a belief at the beginning. It wasn't a belief when the numbers were up. It wasn't a belief when you were doing well. And I find it so interesting how when things fluctuate, when things go down, when we end up in crisis, suddenly everybody wants to invoke God. But there's a reason the principle says, trust God from the very beginning, and whatever else you do will prosper. Whatever plans you make will succeed. There's a reason the principle says this, because it goes better when you start with God, not when you throw in God as a Hail Mary way late into the game because you feel desperate and things look scary, but it goes the best when you start with God. There's a reason this principle tells us, I promise you, you don't want to be operating from your own supply, because there will come a time when your own supply feels inadequate. There will come a time when you don't know how and don't know what to do. There will come a time when you don't feel good enough. There's a reason the principle says, I promise you, you don't want your needs to be met according to your supply, but according to God's supply. And so what's really on my heart in this idea number one today, and I guess the way that I feel led to say it is, if you have to learn this principle in a crisis moment first, that's okay. I actually relate to that. I feel like the first time I actually fully integrated that God was my source on the deepest level, it was a difficult season. It was a tough moment. It was in the middle of a circumstance where the numbers looked down, not up, and bad, not good. And so if you have to learn this right here, right now, in the middle of a crisis, in the middle of a hard time, in the middle of a down moment, that's okay. But my prayer and my heart would be that you are able to learn this in such a way that you can build a core belief, one that sticks with you for the rest of your life, that becomes the starting point for everything else you do from this day forward. What I pray that we can break today is the pattern that says, I don't need God at the starting point. I don't need God when I'm taking action and feeling good. I don't need God when I feel like I know how. I don't need God when I feel like I know what I'm doing. I don't need God when I'm up. I don't need God in success. I don't need God on the mountain. But if I end up in crisis, if things go down badly enough, if I end up in a scary situation, then I might get curious about this idea I've been hearing Stefan say all along, that God is my source. I pray that we don't do that this year, family. I pray that we can interrupt and break that pattern once and for all. You know, a few months ago, I did a teaching and I asked you, what are you committed to believe no matter what? What are you committed to believe no matter what? And just like I shared with you in a recent episode, it's not what we do impulsively that usually changes our life. It's what we do consistently. In the same way, I would suggest to you, it's not going to be the belief you tried on for 30 minutes that really changed your life. It's going to be the belief that you planted yourself in. It's going to be the belief that you held on to. It's going to be the belief that you were willing to be committed to no matter what. And so I want to know in the comments, for real, for real, for real, I want to know if you are willing to commit to this belief, to making it a core belief of your own, and to starting from this place in everything you do as you think about money for the rest of your life. I've asked you before, what belief are you willing to commit to no matter what? And if you haven't yet chosen this one, if you haven't yet committed to this one, if you haven't yet built this one within yourself, may I suggest this is one that will really serve you for the rest of your life. Now, let me acknowledge, before we move on to idea 2 and the rest, let me acknowledge, I always welcome anyone to be here, to be on the channel, to watch an episode, to listen to my stuff, to learn from me, etc. I always welcome anyone to do that, no matter what they believe. You cannot believe in God and still be listening. I'm glad you're here. You can be unsure if you're comfortable with the word God and still be listening. I'm glad you're here. You can believe something different from me on 90% of topics, or maybe you don't know. Maybe you're still figuring out and sorting through what you believe on a lot of things. All of that is okay. All of that is welcome. I'm glad you're here, and I pray that no matter what, you listen to the fullness of this episode, because there's a lot of sound ideas in it regardless. But I also want to be very transparent here, and I want to give you a full disclosure statement. Viewer discretion, listener discretion advised, okay? The list of ideas I am sharing with you today will not work to a maximum level. I'm not saying they won't work at all. I'm not saying they won't help. I'm not saying they won't do something. But full disclosure, viewer discretion advised here. The list of ideas I am sharing today will not work to a maximum level if you don't have this operating system. And I'm not going to take a lot of time with this analogy. I've spoken to it before, but one of the things I think is challenging, even just when we communicate with other human beings, especially online, and particularly when we're exchanging ideas and in the realm of self-improvement and personal development, one of the things that gets tricky is we're not all working with the same software or hardware. We're not all working from the same starting point, and particularly, we're not all working from the same operating system. And so I just want to be very transparent. I just want to acknowledge here, trying to work with these ideas without beginning from the place that God is my source, always, 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 and I'm never in it alone, will maybe feel kind of like somebody trying to follow iPhone instructions on an Android device or a Google device or a Samsung device, okay, or vice versa. It may not work as well. It may not flow as well. It may not all connect seamlessly the same way. And so again, no matter what you believe and where you are on your journey, I welcome you here. I'm glad you're here, and I pray that you listen to the end. But I also just wanted to say that very explicitly up front, that this list of ideas I am sharing with you today begins with this number one, on purpose and as a foundation for a reason. And if you try to work these principles and work these ideas without any connection to the source, without starting there, without that core belief, it may not work the same way. And so we had to start there. And before we move on to number 2, one more thing I just have to say is, literally just last night, a partner messaged me who has been listening to my teachings and doing this work and connected very consistently for more than a year. And literally last night, this partner messaged me, shout out, you know who you are. And they said, over the past year, as I look back on it, God has proven to be so trustworthy. Now, this partner has had an amazing journey. has had some amazing growth and increase and expansion. This partner and their family have actually been a living demonstration of so many of the ideas that we're going to talk about today. But I just felt like it was perfect timing, and I was meant to get that message right before I recorded this for you, because in their own words, they said, as I look back on the last year, I have to say, God has proven to be so trustworthy. So everything else builds on this. Everything else flows naturally from this. It all begins with this number one idea, that you are not your source. You are not meant to be your own source. You don't have to carry the pressure and the burden and the weight of having to be your own source. God wants to be your source. God is the ultimate source. God is an infinite source and supply. And this moment would be a great moment to choose to build this as an unconditional, no matter what, belief for yourself. And let me know if you're doing that in the comments, that God is my source. I'm not in it alone. That changes everything. Now, if you need support building this belief because it's new to you and it feels like a foreign language to you and it feels a little ethereal, it feels too good to be true, it feels hard to trust, I will just mention quickly here, I did an entire podcast episode specifically designed to be a prayer and a healing and a subconscious reprogramming all around this one truth. Somebody please link it for us in the comments in case I forget, and I will do my best to have it linked for you in the episode description as well. But there is literally a track that you can play in your own daily life again and again and again that says it 100 different times, 100 different ways, with 100 different micro principles and prayers to reinforce it all. And if this belief feels like a stretch for you right now, for the person listening that wants to believe this is true, but it still feels too good to be true, I would really invite you, very specifically, to use this God is my source track. And over the next 30 days, to listen to at least the first part, the meditation part of that track. There's more with it. There's also some teaching and a little message and a prayer. But at the very least, that first chunk, that meditation part of the teaching, I want to invite you, if you need help building this belief in your life, to use that track and listen to it every single day for 30 days in a row. And see what it does in your life. I promise you, you can build a new belief so much faster than you think, and this one is worth building. Idea number one, God is my source, and I'm never in it alone. With that foundation laid, we move now to idea number two. And again, I pray you're taking notes. You can write this down. Somebody please type this out in the comments for us. Idea number two. I have the power to generate wealth. Everybody either writing this down, speaking it out loud right where you are, or typing it out in the comments to affirm it for yourself. I have the power to generate wealth. This was a huge one for me. And without going into my full story, I know many of you know different pieces of it, but let me just remind you or share if you're unfamiliar that I got kicked out of the house as an 18-year-old and found myself on my own suddenly and unexpectedly, did not know if I was going to make it, did not know where funds were going to come from for everything, did not know what I was going to do or have a plan. And it was very scary. And it was very intense, as you can imagine. It was a traumatically defining moment of my life. And so really my earliest memories as an adult, I just want to share so you know where my starting point was. I did not feel safe in this area. I did not feel comfortable in this area. I did not feel like I knew what I was doing in this area. And so there was really no sense of empowerment there. It often felt like the only way I was even going to make it is if some miracle occurred and somebody who was better with money and more lucky with money than me helped me out. So if you've been there or that's how things feel right now, I get it. I get it. But I want you to know today, I believe that this idea applies to you just as much as it applies to me, that God is no respecter of persons. That, yes, there are unique things about me because God only made one Steph in Lovegrove, but on a spiritual level, hear me when I say this, family, there is nothing special about me. I'm not saying that in a self-deprecating way, okay? This is on a level of belief, on a level of spiritual principle. I am unique. I am a one-of-a-kind masterpiece of God. I have plenty of self-confidence. There's no issue, but I want you to hear, God is no respecter of persons. I don't have more access to God than somebody else does. And on a spiritual level, there is nothing special about me where I get to have it and you don't, where I get lucky and you don't, okay? So I believe this idea is meant to reach you today right where you are. And I can just speak from experience. This was a huge shift for me that I really needed. To step into an awareness that said, I have power to generate wealth. I actually want to do a little exercise. I didn't plan on doing this, but I feel led to in the moment. If you're listening with me right now on YouTube, and you can do this exercise no matter where you're listening, but please interact, those of you on YouTube. Would you take a second and ask yourself, how true does that statement feel from 1 to 10? 1 being no resonance. Maybe somebody else's life, couldn't be me. That feels completely and utterly false. Okay, that's 1. 10 being that feels completely true. That feels like a fact. Just as much as I could say, I live in Los Angeles, my name is Stefan, and the sky is blue. It doesn't even feel like a belief. That just feels like a truth. Okay, that's number 10. Somewhere between there, 1 being the low end, 10 being the high end, I would love to do a quick check and just hear from you. How true does that feel? As you personally hear that idea, that I have the power to generate wealth. Now, as you share your answers, I'm going to get very controversial here for a moment on purpose. Because what I know is that some of you were raised just like I was, or in some ways similar to how I was, in church, in tradition, in religion, that gave you a message. When it comes to God, think poverty, not prosperity. When it comes to God, think poverty, not power. Let me know in the comments if that resonates with you, if you relate to that however it happened, consciously or subconsciously, from wherever you got it in terms of influence, wherever it happened along the way of your journey, somehow it got instilled in you that when you think about God, think poverty, not prosperity. Think poverty, not power. You know, I've shared this example before, but one very visceral example for me is when I was little, in the church world that I grew up in, they told us lots of what they would call missionary stories. And what I observed, what I integrated into my little kid brain over time, hearing story after story after story, is that it felt to me like God showed up for people, but only when things were very, very bad. Only in a crisis, only in an emergency. It was like, to use a modern U.S. example, God was a spiritual FEMA department. And if there's a giant disaster, if there's a massive crisis, if there's an emergency and everything is falling apart and things are going very, very wrong, maybe God will step in as a spiritual FEMA department. And I very specifically remember this story that they told us again and again and again in junior church of there was a man with an orphanage and they ran out of food and they ran out of water and they had nothing to give the children and the children were going to survive and they didn't know what to do and they had no way to make money. But in the nick of time, a baker showed up at the door with bread and milk. And so that is what got integrated into my consciousness. So even if I was going to try to live out in my own life this idea that God is the source, what it meant to me for God to be the source was for God to show up as a spiritual FEMA department. And do you notice what's missing in that story and in that paradigm? There's no power. I didn't even think about this when I started using this example, but a spiritual FEMA department is maybe a perfect example of this paradigm because often FEMA steps in when people have no resources and no access and no support and no ability to fix anything and yes, no power. And I can't help but notice in that story that I was told that made such an impression on me as a little kid, the only way I understood God being the source was God showing up in crisis. And the people in the story were helpless. The people in the story were in dire straits. The people in the story were just stuck in an emergency. No power. And so maybe you're listening to this and you relate to this idea that somewhere consciously and subconsciously it was instilled in you. When it comes to God, think poverty, not prosperity. Think poverty, not power. Now, I'm not here to do a full-on, in-depth theology study in this video, but I want you to know, and partners, the portal is there for a reason. You can ask questions further if you need further help with this. I just feel so strongly today. We have to unlink this in our minds. If it is there on any level, because it's wrong. That connection, that association, that inner link that so many of us have mentally when it comes to God and money is wrong. And I originally had no plan to go through all of this and list all of this out. But as I was praying for and getting ready for this teaching today, I felt led that we needed to go through this for somebody. And for somebody, this is exactly what you needed. For somebody, this is going to be the best thing that you get out of this entire episode. And I feel a conviction. Literally, in the final moments before I hit record today, I started feeling this deep inner conviction that we are undoing an energetic lock, an energetic trap, an energetic stronghold, to use a very spiritual word, that somebody has been stuck in around this, that has been keeping you in an experience of lack over and over and over again that is not God's will for you. And we are going to shift that today. What I want to suggest to you today is that God's will for you all along, and I mean all along, and I am so sorry that you were misinformed, that God's will for you all along has not been poverty, suffering, and lack, but that all along, God's will for you has been prosperity and power. And so I, again, wasn't originally in the plan, wasn't originally in my notes, but I added it with such a divine conviction that this was meant to be in this particular episode. And let me know in the comments if you feel this part was for you. That would encourage me greatly to hear that. But I want to go through a list of things from the Bible that I am willing to bet many of you were never taught, many of you were misinformed, many of you never heard, that just make it clear there's been a thread of prosperity there all along, even if you never heard it in church. And some of you are like, this doesn't match my life experience. I didn't grow up with this. This doesn't resonate with me at all. That's fine. You can listen from curiosity, or you can skip this section entirely. But for whoever needs this, I want to give you these examples just to make you think and to shake up some patterns in our brain today, okay? Let's go into the list. Jesus says at one point in his teaching, the rich will struggle to enter the kingdom of heaven. Famous line, okay? Actually, famously misquoted and taken out of context, but go with me, okay? Jesus says famously, the rich will struggle to enter the kingdom of heaven. And yet, what I never realized for 30 years was, instead of cheering this on, his disciples, his entire team, his circle of friends, all look distraught and look at him and say, well, how do any of us stand a chance then? Which is funny, because I was led to believe that Jesus was very poor. Despite, by the way, getting millions of dollars worth of gifts at his birth, I was led to believe Jesus was very poor. His disciples were very poor. Everyone around him walked a path of poverty. And yet, as an adult, I realized, years later, I realized, wait a second. When Jesus says the rich will struggle to enter the kingdom of heaven, his inner circle looks at him and goes, but that's us. So how do any of us have a chance? And of course, there is an answer for them. And there is a principle Jesus is teaching, but I wanted to begin my list there because could it be you didn't get the whole story? You know, when Jesus is arrested, it's interesting, we are told, they don't throw away his clothes, which would be the norm for a poor person at that time. But they don't throw the clothes away. They actually gamble on them because they were probably worth multiple thousands of dollars. In fact, we are told by one historian, it wasn't just a high quality robe, it was high quality undergarments as well. Could it be you didn't get the whole story? Over and over and over in ancient texts, we are never told that the blessing of God creates conditions of poverty, lack, and suffering for anybody. We are never told that. But over and over in ancient texts, we are told countless times that the blessing brings harvest and success and financial good and increase and abundance. In fact, there's over 100 different instances where we are told this. Could it be you didn't get the whole story? I can't help but notice Jesus never did a miracle where he wreaked havoc on a person's life or made them sick or made them suffer or made them go broke or made them poor. Every one of his miracles calmed the chaos for every person, healed the illness, and delivered immediate provision to meet any need, any hunger, any lack. Even in his first miracle, just simply to provide wine, and not only wine, but the very best wine for a party, for a celebration. Could it be you didn't get the whole story? When Jesus tells the parable of the talents, how everybody starts out with a different amount that they are given by God. I bet nobody ever told you teaching that the lowest amount of talents described in that story would be, in modern terms and modern currency equivalent, somebody who has a couple $100,000 to work with. The top individuals of the story, we're talking millions. We're talking multi-millions as the baseline. And I wonder if you, like me, heard perhaps a story like that and 1 talent, 2 talents, 5 talents. It sounds like we're talking about a very little amount. It sounds like we're talking about people who don't have much, but maybe we didn't understand what the talents would actually be worth in dollars. So could it be you didn't get the whole story. I continue on with my list here. The Proverbs 31 woman has been talked about over and over and over again. She's all over Pinterest. She's all over Bible studies. She's all over religious bookstores. Let me know in the comments if you grew up hearing about the Proverbs 31 woman. But did you know one trait of the Proverbs 31 woman that is mentioned early on is that she was full of wealth, had luxurious clothes, and practiced extravagant generosity? Could it be, family, that we didn't get the whole story? I could give example after example after example. Literally, I could come up with a dozen and use up all the rest of my time going into all of them. But last but not least, let me just share one more on my list. This is, I admit, a more recent one for me to even know as an adult. Did you know the earliest person to ever believe in Jesus in Europe? It's a story that is recorded for us. It's in the canon texts, as they would call them, who, by the way, is a woman. And I just want to mention that unapologetically for all people who have ever used religion or Christianity in any way against women, to make women feel lesser, to make women feel like they don't have a place in leadership or in spirituality, etc. I want to mention in so many of these stories, the first people to believe were very often women, and they made sure, even in a very sexist culture, somehow they made sure in these ancient texts to tell us that the first one was so often a woman, that the one who believed was a woman, that the one who made it possible was a woman. And we know that Jesus was funded by wealthy women. We know that Paul, who wrote so many of the texts, was funded by wealthy women. I could go on and on and on, but let me stay on track here. The earliest person to ever believe in Europe was a woman. Her name was Lydia. And what we are told is that she was a seller of purple clothing. Now, I like purple. Okay, I happen to have a wallet thing attached to my phone that's purple. I like the color. But what we miss in modern times hearing that is purple clothing is significant because purple clothing was the most expensive type of clothing you could possibly have at that time. We're talking the Louis Vuitton of that day, the Prada of that day, the Gucci of that day. That's not an exaggeration. That's not a mischaracterization, okay? Factually, purple clothing. We are talking about the highest end clothing of that day. And I actually, in preparation for this teaching, I did a conversion and I fact checked because I knew purple clothing was worth a lot, but I wanted a number. Something about a number makes it click for me. So I wanted to know, family, how much would one purple robe be worth in a conversion to modern US dollars? And I have to tell you, I wasn't ready for the answer. In fact, let's do a quick little game. Guess what you think the answer is. Somebody guess. Take a guess right now in the YouTube comments. I want to hear, if you want to play along right now, I want to hear what you think, what your best guess would be for how much a purple robe would be worth. And I got to tell you, I was not ready for this answer because the answer is, did you get your guesses in? Pause if you need to. I want everybody to guess. And please, nobody ruin it. Nobody comment the real answer for those watching later. The answer is between 15 million to 60 million US dollars in today's terms. At the time of this recording, it's 2025. For those watching in the years and decades to come, 2025 is when I recorded this. And at this time in modern conversion, one purple robe, my God, would be worth between 15 to 60 million for one piece of fabric. That is hard to fathom, okay? I live in LA, allegedly the city that has the most millionaires concentrated of anywhere in the world, and I still think that's unfathomable. This was not a Temu robe. This was not a Forever 21 robe. This was the kind of thing she made, the kind of outfit, the kind of garments that you might see a celebrity wear for the Grammys, and they don't even own it. They don't even keep it. They return it because it's worth too much. 15 to 60 million. We are talking about massive, massive, massive wealth. And we are told that this was the first person to believe on the whole continent. And she hosted gatherings, and she had extravagant generosity, and she partnered with Paul, and she was a direct investor and supporter, and she helped to fund the work and spread the message and make it possible. And by the way, it wasn't just her. This was always in the story, that there were always incredibly successful people with businesses funding the work, funding the good news, funding the message. Partnership is not a brand new thing, by the way. But she was the very first, and I end my list there, though I could go on to say, could it be you didn't get the full story? And I really want to hear, family, your live in real-time reactions in the comments. How many of these facts that I just shared did you know? How many of those were new information and news to you? Did anything on that list blow your mind? Could it be we didn't get the full story? And see, I believe there's a lot of us who were taught that being in poverty and being in lack and being disempowered around this area was actually God's will for us, was actually the spiritual thing to do. But I'm here today with a new message for you. I'm here today with a life-changing idea. I'm here today to invite you to step into this paradigm that I have the power to generate wealth. You know, Neville Goddard offers as a question that we can ask ourselves, based on how I'm showing up, based on how I operate, based on even how I'm reacting to something that triggers an emotion within me. Neville Goddard says that we can ask, who am I being in this area, and what is it showing me? And somebody please write that question down. Somebody please type that out in the comments, because I believe that every single one of us has the opportunity to ask ourselves, who am I being in this area when it comes to money, when it comes to finances, when it comes to wealth? And what does it show me? And somebody will just have a breakthrough today, even just asking that question. Because I think a lot of us have accidentally been in a scared place or a needy place or a powerless place, and we might have been misinformed, and we might have even thought that that's how it's supposed to work, and we are powerless, and God is the spiritual FEMA department that can come through and bail us out. But again, I want to invite you today into a consciousness of power. You know, if I can suggest a wonderful answer that you can try out and try on to the question, who am I being in this area? I recommend trying on the identity and seeing how it feels of being a child of God, a member of the most royal family in the universe. An identity that I would suggest gives you infinite love, gives you unlimited inheritance, and yes, gives you power. I would really recommend trying on that identity. And I'm inviting you today into this life-changing idea and consciousness and awareness. You know, it is said explicitly in ancient texts. It is a spiritual principle eternally that the blessing empowers us to prosper. That the blessing gives us the power to get wealth. That God gives us the power to get wealth. And do you see how important this is? It builds on number one, but it is equally important to number one. Because some of you may have heard number one and thought, I'm very spiritual, Stefan. I'm very on board with you already. God is the source. But some of you, like I was, were taught God is the source in a very powerless way. You were taught God is the source in a very crisis, emergency, spiritual FEMA department kind of way. And I want to give you a higher paradigm that changed my life to understand the blessing means you are empowered to prosper, and God gives you the power to create wealth. You are meant to have power here. And so there's an invitation today to leave behind any victimhood or self-pity consciousness, to recognize in this moment that trust and surrender don't mean I'm supposed to feel powerless. And that maybe, just maybe, feel into this with me, maybe, just maybe, could it be God really does want me to feel empowered in this area? I feel like in this area, there are two very unhealthy extremes that people often oscillate between, like it has to be one or the other. And neither of them is real power. So on one end of the spectrum, we have the people that cling to the illusion of control, that believe busyness is a virtue, and they always need to be doing something. They always need to be taking action at all times, never resting. And there are people at this end of the spectrum, at this extreme, who are in a pattern of hustle and force and manipulation and control and exhausting actions taken out of fear. Because that's the only way they feel like it's going to be okay. That's the only thing they feel like they can trust. That's the only way that they know how to feel power. And that is distorted, and that is an unhealthy end of the spectrum, and that is not real power. But then on the other end, there are people who are stuck on the couch. There are people who never put themselves out there. There are people who never sell and talk about their work. There are people who feel paralyzed by fear and don't do anything. There are people who feel like all I can do is sit here and wait for something to show up at my door or to show up on my phone, on my screen, in my accounts by some miracle. Do you see what I'm saying? That neither of these places has real, authentic spiritual power. Trying to force and endlessly hustle and control everything is not the behavior of someone who is rooted in power and knows the blessing empowers me to prosper, and God has already given me the power to create wealth. That is not somebody rooted in real power, but neither is hopelessness and despair. Neither is giving up. Neither is apathy. Neither is laziness. Neither is, I'm not even going to give myself a chance to see what I'm capable of. I'm not even going to put myself out there. There's really nothing I can do that would make a difference anyway. Neither of those is a person connected to power. And I believe God wants you to feel empowered in this area. So can I ask you today to begin exploring with me? And somebody please type these questions out for everyone in the comments. How would you look at your numbers if you were in your power? How would you look at your numbers if you were in power? How would you sell if you were in your power? That's a question for every business owner and everybody in sales out there. How would you sell if you were in your power? How would you manage your money if you were in your power? How would you manage your money if you were in your power? I will tell you this, it would not be from the extreme of delusion, and it also would not be from the extreme of despair. And may I also say, and I'm sorry in advance, if you can't say amen, say ouch, because I know this part might be stepping on toes, but one sure sign that you are out of your power is any version of avoidance. because we're never in our power when we're choosing avoidance, and avoidance never serves us long term. And so I just want to ask you, how would you manage your money if you were in your power? Couple more questions I want to give you here. How would you take action if you were in your power? How would you take action if you were in your power? Again, I'll reference the extremes and say it wouldn't be forced and it wouldn't be lazy. It wouldn't be burnout and it wouldn't be apathy. How would you take action if you were in your power? Last but not least, I want to give you this question. How would you look for and seize opportunities if you were in your power? One way that I know someone is out of their power is that they're blind to opportunities even right around them, that they're not seeing opportunities. In fact, they're not even looking for opportunities. They have closed off to opportunities. They're not expecting any opportunities. May I ask you, how would you look for and seize opportunities if you were in your power? I want to make it clear, this principle today is not about force, but power. And I don't want you to be in force mode in any area of your life this year, but I do want you in your power. And idea number 2 that truly did change my life in this area was when I learned, when I recognized, when I made the shift that I have the power to generate wealth. God has given that to me, and I want to live with that power. If I have it, I want to work with it. If I have it, I want to use it to the fullest advantage. That brings us to idea number 3. Idea number 3 that changed my money world, and it is this. The more investment decisions I make, the better my future becomes, and the easier my life feels. The more investment decisions I make, I hope you're writing this down or typing this out in the comments, the better my future becomes, and the easier my life feels. And let me know in the comments if you're still with me. And if we were riding a roller coaster together, I would say, hold on to the handlebars if you're wired that way, a little extra tight, because we're about to get a little more practical here in this idea number 3, okay? Talking about investment decisions and how the more investment decisions I make, the better my future becomes, the easier my life feels. You know, in a teaching that I did earlier, last year, actually 2 years ago now, which you can find archived in the money playlist on my channel, I taught you about the difference between investment energy and debt energy. Or we could also say investment decisions versus debt decisions. We're not just talking about money. It's a principle here, and it's a key difference to understand. So here it is at the core. Whenever I make a decision, because it feels good now, it gives me some form of instant gratification now, it does something for me now, right? And I don't care about later. And I'm not thinking about my future. And I just want it now, and I'll deal with it later. I'll handle it later. I'll pay for it later. Whenever I make a decision from that place, whether money or otherwise, that is debt energy. I would call that a debt decision. In other words, I'm borrowing from my future, putting something onto my future, giving a burden to my future self because of something I want right now. That is at its core. It doesn't mean it's always evil or wrong or terrible, but just understand by definition that is debt energy. That is a debt decision. Now, the flip side of that is whenever I choose something that may not be the easiest right now, that may not seem to give me anything or have any benefit now, that might actually require something of me now, that might cost me something right now, that might be a little bit more difficult in the now. Whenever I choose something like that as a gift to my future self, where I'm paying for it now to put it into my future. I'm paying for it now to bless my future. I'm paying for it now because my future self will be thankful that I did. Whenever I make a choice in the present, not for how it feels in the present, but for my future self, that is an investment choice. That is investment energy. That is an investment decision. And so I've shared this principle with you before. What I learned is the more of those second category that I make, the more investment decisions I make, the better my future becomes and the easier my life feels. And I could flip it around, and the opposite is also true, and we're going to talk about both sides of this for a moment. The more debt decisions I make, the worse my future starts to feel, and the harder my life becomes. I know that one's not as positive and uplifting to hear, but again, this is not just about a positive message. It's about thinking differently, and this idea is really one of those where some of us would benefit from thinking differently, and this would bless and heal and upgrade your entire life. The more debt decisions I make, the worse my future starts to feel and the harder my life becomes. This is a huge idea that has changed my money world. Now, there's two sides of this. Let's get the bad one out of the way first. Let's talk about debt first, especially on a literal level, like financial debt. I want to speak to this for a moment. My experience has been seeing debt as a terrible prison, which is what some people literally teach, did not help me, did not motivate me, did not result in me taking it seriously and doing something about it. It actually hurt me. That kind of paradigm had the opposite effect on me. And so if you relate to that, if it makes you feel the same way, I get it. Seeing debt as a terrible prison just made me feel guilt and shame and judgment and condemnation and self-loathing. It did not make me get out of debt. It did not make me pay down debt. It did not ultimately help me. But when I started to understand and to look at all of my life through the lens of investment decisions versus debt decisions, there was a framework there. There was something in that paradigm that changed the way I saw my life and changed the way I saw my decisions. And it did something for me. And specifically, financial debt. When I started to see debt not as a prison, not as an evil, rotten thing, not as a clear, undeniable sign that I had failed and I had messed it up and I had done something wrong. But when I just started to see debt as an unnecessary thing that was not evil, that was not wrong, that was not a failure, but it was just unnecessary. It was something that I might not prefer anymore. It was something that the blessing said I didn't have to take on. It wasn't required. It wasn't the only option. And when I started to see it that way, as an unnecessary thing, something that the blessing said I didn't have to take on, something that just maybe wasn't my preference anymore, and I could forgive and accept and be okay with moments in the past where I had chosen that route. And also simultaneously, in that forgiveness and acceptance and neutrality, I could recognize I might see this differently now. I might have more information now. I might not want to choose this anymore. I might feel differently in this season. I might have a different preference in this season. When I started to make that shift, it freed me. And it really did something permanent. And it helped me up level gradually more and more and more into a new paradigm. And so I would invite you today into this beautiful consciousness that you are the head and not the tail, above and not beneath. And as these famous words have been written, the lender, not the borrower. And I want to specifically speak to that for a moment. Because again, I think there's a way to hear this with no guilt, shame, judgment. I think there's a way to hear this without a negative charge in it. There's a way to hear this that's lighter. One modern translation, when it gets to that line that famously is quoted, the head, not the tail, above, not beneath, the lender, not the borrower. The way it says it in modern English is, you will never have to borrow. And I pray that somebody latches onto that and claims that for yourself right here and now, because I will tell you that changed my experience of debt forever. When I stepped into this consciousness, I will never have to borrow. See, it didn't create all of this excess energy that turned debt into this scarlet letter and this giant problem I needed to solve. It didn't do any of that. It was just a light energy that offered me an up level, that offered me an upgrade. And I started living into and normalizing, I will never have to borrow. And this idea, number 3, in so many ways, really did shift everything in the external realm for me faster than I ever expected once I internalize this. So now I want to move a little bit to the positive side of this, though it's all interconnected, investment energy versus debt energy. But let me say it this way, and I really pray that this is helping someone so practically today. This is one way to look at it. Percentages that stack up against you over time end up feeling like a burden. Whereas percentages that increase in your favor over time are a gift. And I just want to acknowledge there may be someone watching this, listening to this, and you're like, this is Finance 101. I knew this stuff in high school. My parents taught me this. This is all so basic. This is all obvious. And if that's you, no problemo. You can fast forward. You can skip ahead. Maybe this teaching isn't for you, but there are many of us that even though these things might be basic to some, even though this might be Finance 101, et cetera, there are some of us that were not taught this stuff growing up. And particularly, there were some of us where this was never taught to us or modeled for us or explained to us in a way that felt good, in a way that made sense. Certainly not taught to us connected to spiritual principles that we could embrace and feel good about and feel aligned with on a soul level. And so I really pray that even this one specific principle within idea number 3 can help someone today. Percentages that stack up against you over time end up feeling like a burden. Percentages that increase in your favor, that build for you over time, will ultimately feel like a blessing and feel like a gift. And I just feel led to say, here is one non-sexy, but very tangible and utterly life-changing goal for somebody this year. Are you ready for it? Here's a goal that I would submit for your consideration. Somebody listening to this might want to set a goal this year. I want to remove everything, to clear everything in my life that has a negative accumulating percentage to it. Meaning, I'm going to pay down those accounts. I'm not going to hold balances there. I'm not going to take anything new on that does that, right? Somebody might want to set this goal. to first remove everything or clear everything currently in your life that has a negative accumulating percentage on it, because chances are in the end, those typically always end up feeling like a burden sooner rather than later. And as you simultaneously do that, here's the other part of the goal: to start to build at least one, if not multiple things that have a positive accumulating percentage. And I'm not here to be a financial advisor. I'm not here to be a financial expert. I'm not here to tell you, open this kind of account, do this, not that. That is for you to be guided to. That is your decision to make. And I'm going to stay in my lane and my expertise and my zone of genius. But I did feel led to offer for somebody today. It might be an incredible goal and an incredible shift for you this year to make it your goal. Let me remove and clear anything in my world that has a negative accumulating percentage to it. And let me start to build one or multiple accounts, funds, investments, whatever it is in my world that have a positive accumulating percentage. And I really am trying to word it this way, the way that I understand it in terms of the principles and the way that I see it and the way that it makes sense in my brain in a way that lights me up, because I believe there are a lot of people listening to this, and you're very intelligent. It's not like these concepts are brand new. It's not like you don't know a lot of this stuff. But in the past, it hasn't really become a value of yours. In the past, you haven't had a reason to care or to do something differently. In the past, you haven't been able to embrace this in a way that clicked for you and felt good and felt aligned for you. And I really believe this is helping somebody today. Now, real quick before we go on to idea number 4, let's talk specifically about the investment side of things for one more moment here. Because debt energy and debt decisions are what we want to avoid more and more and more in the days to come, because that is a gift to ourselves and that is a self-loving choice to make. And I'm actually going to say more on that idea later in this teaching. But the flip side of that is investment choices. Things that our future self will be grateful for. And this applies to all sorts of areas of life, not just money. When you choose a healthy, nourishing choice, when you choose to take care of your body, when you choose to go move and work your heart rate and build some muscle, et cetera, right? There are so many things, so many examples this can apply to where we're making a choice that is an investment into ourselves. We're making a choice that our future self will be grateful for. And I just wanted to share this final piece and paradigm before we move on from idea number 3, because I remember very clearly a defining moment in my life was when years ago I was leading a mastermind call. And I had somebody on the call who, to this day, would probably be one of the most successful, highest earning, highest net worth clients and individuals that had ever been a part of my community. And people are dialoguing, and one of the members of the mastermind is sharing that they have been working through and wanting to improve, wanting to up-level some of their paradigms around the idea of saving. And they're talking about how for the longest time, they've never wanted to save, they've never cared about, quote-unquote, saving, they've never had an incentive for it because it never felt good to them. And all the ways that it was taught to them actually felt terrible. And by the way, I can, and certainly at the time I could relate to this, because what I absorbed, the key message that I absorbed about saving growing up was you need to have a rainy day account. in case of emergency, in case you lose your job, in case something goes wrong, you need to have a rainy day account. And I don't have to explain to you why that didn't feel exciting and inspiring to me. Even, quite frankly, and maybe even more so, when I entered the manifestation space, that felt worse than ever to me. Because my brain is going, wait a second. So you want me holding the vision of a rainy day? You want me planning for a rainy day? You want me expecting something to go wrong? I don't want to use my expectation for that. I don't want to plan on a worst case scenario. And so I related to what this person had shared as what I remembered hearing about savings growing up. And then I will never forget this particular individual that I described to you a few moments ago. She raised her hand and she said, could I speak to this for a moment? And it was an immediate yes for me because I knew whatever she is going to say, it's going to be good. I don't know what is about to come out of her mouth, but whatever she is going to say here, I promise it's going to be good. So I said, of course you can share. And she says, again, the highest net worth, highest earning, etc. individual, maybe of all time, or certainly one of them, ever in my work. She says, when I was growing up, what I was always taught, and then when our kids were growing up, what we always taught them is that you never want to just save money just for the sake of money, just to have it sitting there. She said, we would never do that. And I wasn't taught that growing up, and that's not something we ever taught our kids. She said, what I was always taught growing up, and what we always taught our kids growing up, is that you don't want to work for money as your lifelong paradigm, but money exists to work for you. And by the way, I could do a whole spiritual principle segue there about money is not meant to be the end all be all. Money is not meant to be the thing that dominates your inner narrative. Money is not good enough or powerful enough to be God. Money is meant to support you. Money is meant to work for you. And I could say so much there. But again, back to the call. She said, what I was always taught growing up and what we always told our kids growing up is that you don't want to work for money for the rest of your life. Money works for you. So when you get money of any amount, your number one job is to figure out, how can I steward this money in such a way that it ends up increasing, that it ends up working for me, that it ends up turning into more money, even if it's a 5% return, even if it's a 10% return, even if it's a gradual over time return. She said, what I was always told growing up and what we always told our kids is you never want money just sitting there. It should always be doing something. It should always be increasing. It should always be working for you. And can I tell you, this was a life-changing moment for me. This probably happened, I want to say 7 years ago, 8 years ago now. I don't remember exactly, but I wanted to share this very candidly as a part of my journey with you, especially partners. I want you to know this is a tangible idea that changed my mind and therefore my life in this area forever, because I remember sitting there realizing, maybe there is something to this rich dad, poor dad idea. We didn't all hear the same things growing up. We literally hear different messages about money depending on the home we're raised in. I just remember suddenly realizing this feels new to me. And I had even been in the manifestation world for some time. I felt like at that point, I had already done a lot of work and my money mindset had come a long way. And maybe for me, this was one of the first examples where I really started to understand it's not just that they think positively and think on a high frequency. That may be true, but it's not just that. It's also thinking differently. And nobody ever taught me to think like this. But that changed my mind in a way that permanently stuck with me and changed my life, changed my money world forever. And so under idea number 3, I wanted to pass it on to you today. And I just wanted to leave you under this idea with really this question. The giant question for you this year is, what can I do with income or investments that will build and increase on its own? I want every single person, no one not participating, no one excluding themselves or leaving themselves out of this moment. I want every single person to write down this question or to type out this question and really to take a moment to sit with it. What can I do with income or investments this year that will build and increase on its own? And God, I just pray that this shift is really occurring on every level for every person who needs this up level today. That from this day forward, they wouldn't just think about making money or saving money, but that they would think about it's meant to build. It's meant to work for me and do something for me. It's meant to continually increase. And I am just praying right now, and I decree and declare over every person listening right now that a shift in your mind is occurring today, where you will start to recognize the debt energy, the debt patterns, the debt decisions in your world in the days to come, and they will not seem so appealing, and you will see through the illusion there. And that you will be guided more and more and more into investment energy, investment patterns, investment decisions that your future self is so thankful for. And within it all, I am praying over you today. I am decreeing and declaring over every single person who receives it and is in agreement with me now, that both with your income and your investments, you absorb this idea that changed my life so much so it can change your life equally, if not more. And as you look at everything this year, as you look at all the flow and all the pathways available to you, you will start to find where are all of the opportunities for growth, particularly the ones that I have been missing up until this point. Can I grow the average amount that I receive per transaction? Can I grow? Can I increase the amount of times that someone returns as a customer and that someone buys? Can I grow? Can I increase the satisfaction somebody has as a customer or client of mine? Can I grow or increase the number of people that my marketing reaches? Can I grow or increase the number of people who are a part of my consumer and client base? How can I grow and increase the impact of all of my sales and marketing dollars? How can I grow and increase the effectiveness of my campaigns and my team? How can I grow and increase in the stewardship of the money that comes in? Where can I be investing this? Where can it grow the most? Where can it do the most for me? And again, I'm not trying to be a financial expert. I'm not trying to be your financial advisor here, but what I know for sure, what I believe, what I speak over you is that once you really get this principle of investment energy and you decide I am always making decisions from and for my future self, and I'm always expecting growth, I'm always trying to build, I'm always looking for where can this increase? How can this work for me? What can I do that would be the best possible investment and the best possible stewardship of this? When you start living from this place, I promise you, family, everything changes for the better. And one thing that I really felt led to say here before we move forward that could really apply to all of these ideas, but I think specifically applies to this idea number 3, okay? Please don't let this idea overwhelm you or paralyze you in such a way that it feels like it's not even worth trying to step into the new. I just want to acknowledge today, and especially on idea number 3, I want to acknowledge that there may be people listening who this feels like so much to take in all at once. And you're hearing me talk about this investment energy versus debt energy. And you're sitting there thinking, Stefan, my life is full of debt energy and debt decisions. And I don't know that I have anything in my life that really reflects investment energy or investment decisions right now. And if that's you, I am so glad that you're here. And I pray that you can feel my heart. I pray that you're able to receive this word today, because let me say it this way. The ideas that we need the most usually show up as a contradiction or a confrontation to some part of our current reality. And somebody please type that out in the comments for us. The ideas that we need the most, the very ideas that will go on to change our life the most, usually show up initially in the form of a contradiction or a confrontation to some part of our current reality. And so it's okay if this feels like a foreign language. It's okay if this feels new and unfamiliar and different. It's okay if this feels like a contradiction that is so far from where you're currently living. And I just want you to know, when I first heard the truth that where I was meant to live, the state of the blessing, is you are the head, not the tail, above, not beneath. You will never have to borrow. Can I be candid and just share that when I first heard that truth, I had borrowed a lot. When I first heard the truth in that mastermind moment, that all of your money is supposed to be working for you, et cetera, et cetera. Can I share with you, family? I think I had zero money at the time working for me in that way. All I was really thinking about at that moment was making some, making more, making money. That's it. That was the extent of my inner conversation. So when I heard that idea, I don't think I could use a clearer example here. I had zero money working for me in that way. It was absolutely a disruptive, confronting, contradiction idea when it hit my reality, but I am so glad that I let myself receive it. And so please hear today, you don't have to shift this overnight. You don't have to instantly clear all debt energy and debt choices and debt residue from the past in a single moment. You don't have to suddenly step into 100% investment choices always, okay? So please don't use this as a way to judge yourself, and please don't take this as a pressure and a weight and a guilt trip on yourself. But let this idea wash over you. Let the contradiction work in your consciousness in a wonderful way. Let this mental shift take root as you listen today. And I believe a lot of us could benefit from revisiting this teaching, from making this, I know it's a long one, but from making this a teaching that we listen to 2, 3, 4 times, and let this mental shift take root as you do. I promise it will change your life more rapidly than you can imagine. Okay, now I think I've said everything that needed to be said on idea number 3, and we can move on to idea number 4. For all of those taking notes, I hope that's many. For all of those typing these out in the comments, I know that's many as well. Idea number 4 that changed my money world forever is this: overflow is God's will for you. Idea number 4, overflow is God's will for you. And I debated what word to use because I could equally say it is God's plan for you. It is God's design for you. It is God's best for you. But particularly in the spirit of, I think, all of the charged religious ideas and baggage that many people have around the phrase God's will. And in the spirit of this teaching today, and especially what I shared in idea number 2, I wanted to use that phrase very intentionally and word it that way: that overflow is God's will for you. Okay? It isn't just the icing on top. It isn't something excessive or greedy. It isn't a nice thing that some people might get lucky enough to experience in their life, but not very many, only a select few. No, I am here to tell you today, and I want every single person really typing this out in a way that personalizes it and owns it and affirms it for you. Overflow is God's will for me. I want to come back to this video again and again and again as it spreads throughout the world. And I want to see person after person affirming: overflow is God's will for me. Overflow is God's will for me. Overflow is God's will for me. And I will hit that thumbs up or that heart button on every single one of those comments as I am able to, as you claim it with me. Now, to unpack idea number 4, this is what I want to talk about for a few moments today. I have shared with you in the past that there is one miracle, and only one miracle, only one instance, only one story that, to my knowledge, appears in every single ancient spiritual text that we know today as the Gospels. There's only one. And it's, ironically, it's not the story of the birth of Jesus. It's not the story of the resurrection. It's not Jesus making the wine for the wedding, etc. There's only one story that appears in every single book. And it is the feeding of a crowd miraculously through supernatural provision. If you grew up in church, if you have a Sunday school background, you might know this story as the feeding of the 5,000. And I've shared with you before how this is the only miracle story that appears in all the texts. And I'm not going to repeat this. There's an archived teaching on this that you can access on the channel and on the podcast feed if you're curious. It's called From Over Leverage to Overflowing. But I do want to just repeat a small part of it here to remind you that as we learn together in that teaching, what is God's definition of overflow? God's definition of overflow is enough for you, enough for all needs met, enough for desires to be fulfilled, enough to give, enough to save, enough to have leftover, enough to bless the people around you, and still more. And I talked a lot in that teaching about what is God's definition of overflow. But I have to tell you, family, there's a detail in that story that I don't feel like I fully did justice, that I don't feel like we fully got to unpack in that teaching. But I felt really led to do a deep dive on it as I got ready for this one. Because when it comes to the visible manifestation of overflow in that story, we see overflow in the form of baskets. So Jesus does this miracle, And he feeds a crowd, and everybody, the story tells us, eats until they are full, and they had enough, and they were completely satisfied. I love that. Not just bare necessities, not just, it's a disappointing meal, but you're starving, so you're going to accept it and be happy with it. No. Wonderful, bountiful provision where there was more than enough for everybody to eat until they were completely full and satisfied. So this miracle happens. And then every single one of the people in Jesus' inner circle gets to leave and go home with a full basket of overflow left over. And there is such a spiritual and a metaphysical significance to this. And I want you to follow this with me for a moment. So I did my research in preparation for this particular episode. And I found out one of these baskets. There's multiple kinds of baskets that would be used for food in ancient times. I don't want to turn this into the History Channel. I don't want to bore you, but there's very specific words being used here. I did my research on all of this. In specifically the feeding of the 5,000, there is a very specific type of basket being referenced. And what we know is that that type of basket could probably hold, get this, anywhere from 60 to 120 meals worth of food. So think about what this means. For every single one of Jesus' disciples who experienced this miracle, think about what this means. Because again, I think we miss the significance and the nuances and the principles that are hidden here as modern readers. See, when I heard this story and I thought about the disciples taking something home, I will admit, my mind always processed it like a to-go box. A box of leftovers, right? The way that you can be at a restaurant and you enjoy a great meal, and then they ask you, would you like me to box this up for you because it was too much, you couldn't finish it all, and then you take home a box of leftovers. Maybe you'll reheat it and have it for lunch the next day, right? I will admit that I always kind of defaulted to hearing this and thinking about a box of leftovers, but I missed this for so long. I think we've got the percentages all wrong, the picture all wrong, the ratio all wrong, because the baskets that they went home with were not just half a meal or a little bit left over. The baskets that they went home with had enough food in them for 60 to 120 meals. In another miracle of provision, the people leave with baskets that go as high as up to 180 meals left over. I don't know that there could be a more obvious, in-your-face, undeniable picture of overflow than that level of abundance. And so for every single person who experienced this miracle, they did get one meal immediately in the moment. But then they got to go home with potentially 100 extra meals. And here's why I bring this up and take my time with this and what I want you to understand about overflow today. And please listen carefully and hear this, because it is completely possible to actually be attempting to call in overflow while still maintaining a just barely enough belief system and paradigm and consciousness, and to not even realize it. And I pray that this speaks to somebody today, and I pray that this shifts somebody today in a permanent way. Hear me on this. It is not God's highest and best for you for the majority of your money to go to necessities, bills, expenses. And then maybe, just maybe, if you do everything right, if you get lucky, or if you have an extremely good month, maybe, just maybe, you end up with a little bit left over in the end. I'm not judging you whatsoever. if that is your experience right now. But I am here today with a truth that can lift you higher and change your life and set you free. That is not how it was meant to be. That is not the ideal. That is not God's highest and best for you. And I believe this story illustrates for us very, very, very clearly and undeniably. There's actually supposed to be more overflow in the equation than anything else. In other words, this is what I think the story illustrates. The small part is all needs met. Provision, requirements, expenses. That's the smaller part. The big part, the main part, the large part is the overflow, the more than enough, the everything left over. I pray that I'm articulating this well, and if I'm not, I pray that God can make it make sense better than my words are able to, because this is the divine design. And once I saw this in this story, I couldn't get away from it. One bountiful meal in the moment. 100 meals to take home leftover. And don't get me going about the idea of 100-fold return, family. But do you see illustrated here? The needs were just the beginning. Just the starting point of the story, just the foundation being laid. The needs were just the beginning. The majority of the provision was overflow. And I want to suggest to you today, overflow was not meant to be an afterthought. Overflow was not meant to be a best case scenario only miracle. Overflow was meant to be your continual normal. You know, I will never forget a Silicon Valley founder that I was working with one time was talking to me and just narrating for me how they were setting everything up and structuring everything in their company in the early days. And they told me, Stefan, I wouldn't set anything up that didn't have a built-in win. They said, there must be profit in this picture. There must be a win for everyone involved in this picture. There must be, or I won't move forward. And they basically articulated to me, I'm not willing to wait and see what happens. I'm not just hoping that it all works out and pays off 7 years from now. This has to make sense. There has to be a win for everyone here. I wouldn't set up anything or agree to anything that didn't have a clear win. And I'll say more about that in an upcoming idea, but here is what I felt called to speak over you today, as I believe this understanding of overflow, this paradigm of overflow, this new way to see overflow begins to take root and integrate into every level of your consciousness. Here is what I felt led to speak over you today. The equation is changing in your life. The ratio is changing in your life. The picture is changing in your life, starting right here and right now. And we are normalizing in your consciousness from this day forward. Needs are not the big part. Bills are not the big part. Expenses are not the big part. They are accounted for, they are handled, they are covered, they are paid in full, if not early. They are taken care of and provided for, yes, 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 according to God's supply. But the majority is overflow. And I speak over you today that overflow is not an afterthought anymore. Overflow is not a maybe anymore. Overflow is not an occasional lucky break for you anymore. I invite you to claim it with me today, and somebody needs to quite literally speak it with me, affirm it with me, claim it with me for yourself in the comments. The majority of my money is overflow. The majority of my revenue is overflow. The majority of my receiving is overflow from this day forward. And so it is, and so it is, and so it is. Let me know in the comments if you are claiming it with me right now, because I am convinced, I am certain that you are meant to plan on overflow in every season, in every situation, in every equation. And we will talk more about the equation, like I said, in an upcoming idea, but really breathe this in. You are meant to plan on overflow as the base, as the norm, as the expectation in every season, in every circumstance, in every equation. Now, it's okay to be in a temporary moment where we don't know where it's going to come from, where we're going through something, where we temporarily have a need or something unexpected that we have to deal with. No judgment if you are there. I have been there. It's okay to be in a temporary moment like that. But I really want to take a stand for you, and I really want to encourage you today. Please don't settle for that as your norm. Please don't settle for that long term. Please don't settle for that and just accept that as, well, this is the way life is. I really want you to get practical with this spiritual principle today, especially if you've never done this before, especially if you've never looked at this before. You might want to pause this, or after you finish this episode, to really go through, what do I require on a regular basis for all of my needs to be met, for me to live my life fully and comfortably, and then beyond that, to always have overflow, to always have more than enough and left over, to always have available funds that aren't marked for anything, where I have the freedom and the ability to say yes to anything I choose to, anything I want to, anything that God calls me to in the moment. What do I require for my accounts to look like that and make that possible? What do I require for my life to look like that on a regular basis? Do you know what that takes? Do you know what that number is? Do you know your point of overflow right now? And again, I just want to encourage you. I celebrate every single person that is still watching, still listening, still with me at this point in the teaching. And please don't decide to bail now. Please don't turn me off here, because what I have found to be true is that often the more confronting and uncomfortable an idea is to hear, often it is the case that the more our consciousness is healing and upgrading and transforming in real time, even as we hear, in the very best way. Again, I'll say it is so often true that the more confronting and uncomfortable that an idea is to hear, the more it means our consciousness is healing and upgrading and transforming in the best way as we hear it. And that is what I know is happening for so many people all around the world as they listen today. It's an upgrade, upgrade, upgrade across the board to God's will for you, to your highest and best, to what you were created for, to what you were meant to live in, to how it was always intended to be. I'll share an example here that I know one partner in particular will appreciate, and shout out to you. You know who you are. But last year, I was introduced to these stem cell patches that basically, when you wear them, they activate all of the dormant stem cells in your body. And they, I'm not a scientist. I'm going to butcher this. I can't say it in the most articulate way, no doubt. But from my understanding, they basically get all of the available stem cells that can be working for you in your body, working for you to the maximum degree. Okay, that's the best way that I understand it. Now, here's why I bring this up and what I have experienced wearing these stem cell patches over the past year. When you first put the patch on and it begins to activate all of these cells in your body, right? The thing about stem cells is they don't just have one purpose. They don't just do one thing. They can be used for all kinds of purposes and all kinds of functions and all kinds of ways in your body. And so when you begin to activate these dormant stem cells, and again, I'm explaining it the best way that I understand it at least, these cells immediately go to work wherever they naturally conclude, and I'm not saying the cells are anthropomorphic, but they are very intelligent on a cellular level. There's a biological wisdom to your body, right? And so these cells automatically go to wherever in your body needs them the most. Now, here's why I'm taking the time to try to explain this, even though I'm not a scientist, okay? The kinds of things that a lot of people want to wear these patches and activate these stem cells for are exciting things, glamorous things, sexy things, right? Like collagen production and anti-aging, reverse aging, right? And I'm all for that. I'm all for some good skincare. I'm all for some anti-aging. But it's interesting because a lot of people's best case scenario is, I want the stem cells to give me energy and make me feel great. I want the stem cells to improve my sex life. I want the stem cells to boost my collagen and improve my skin and make me look younger. And there's all these fun and exciting things that people want the stem cells to do. But when you first begin to activate the stem cells, they don't do those things first. They don't start with collagen. They don't start with anti-aging. They don't start with a lot of those things. The stem cells are trained by the body, by our body's innate divine wisdom. They are trained to go to the place in your body that needs help the most. And so what that means is, for most people, when they begin this process, there's a detox period. And it doesn't right away feel like it's giving them energy. It doesn't right away feel like this is so anti-aging. This is changing how my skin looks. For most people, when they begin this process, it feels like a detox. It feels intense. It feels like, what is happening to my body right now? Because the stem cells have to first go to anything that's inflamed, anything that is not correct, any places where some cells are growing that shouldn't be growing, any places where something has started to go wrong because of free radicals, any places in your body that are hurting or struggling and need the extra help. The stem cells are trained to go there first. And I know it took a lot of time to explain that, but I wanted to use this example today because when I share these profound spiritual truths, it really is like we are activating the spiritual stem cells in your divine DNA. I really think the analogy tracks here. I think it's a great picture and explanation and understanding of what's happening. And what I want to acknowledge is, for some of us, there is some healing required. There are some adjustments required. There is some detox required for some of us. And I just want to acknowledge, you might be hearing these ideas today, and it feels like a far cry from your belief system. It feels like a far cry from your reality and your circumstances and your accounts in this moment. There are people listening today, and you can feel the massive gap between the consciousness that I am sharing from and the consciousness that you live in. And that is okay. And that is not by accident. And that is why you're here. And I want to invite you and encourage you to let the stem cells go to work. And if you have to move through some contradiction, if you have to move through some transition, if you have to move through some detox, that's okay. But don't think that it won't work for you. Don't think that you're too far gone. Don't think that something is wrong with you and you're not doing it right and you can't have it. Please understand, the stem cells, spiritually speaking, are going to work right now for every single person who is hearing this message of truth. And they're doing their job. They're transforming you, they're healing you, they're upgrading you in any way that is needed. And so let them do their job. Let them go to work. I felt led to say before we move on, let the divine promises go to work for you today. Activating all of your inner knowing, your divine DNA, your spiritual stem cells that know that they are wired for wealth and abundance and prosperity. They are connected to how loved you are. They are connected to your real identity. They are connected to the fullness of your divine inheritance. Let them go to work. And that brings me to idea number 5. That changed my money world forever. Idea number 5, let God lead you to the right vehicle for you. Write this down if you're taking notes. Type it out in the comments. Idea number 5, let God lead you to the right vehicle for you. Let me begin this one here. I personally believe, and I am persuaded, that every single person is meant to have at least one vehicle that consistently supports them with provision in every season of their life. This is my belief. This is my persuasion. I'm going to explain why in a moment, but just hear it for now. Try it on for now. It is my belief and my persuasion that every single person, no matter who you are, what your gifts and skill sets are, what age, etc., that every single person is meant to have at least one vehicle that supports them with provision consistently in every season of their life. And I'll tell you why. You know, I've been in many, many, many spiritual spaces, and I've done all kinds of prayers and meditations and affirmations and rituals and tools and exercises and workshops. And you can imagine the massive number of things I've done over the years that were meant to help people step into more abundance and wealth and prosperity. And one thing that I started to notice in all of this personal development work that people were doing around this area, people would often say something like, I welcome in all forms of money and wealth into my life, expected and unexpected. I heard that in meditations. I heard that in books. I heard that in prayers. And this phrase started to stand out to me. Expected and unexpected. And I welcome it all in. Expected and unexpected. Now, I actually am very on board with that. I want you to receive on every level, okay? Yes, expected and unexpected. I want the floodgates to be open in your life and in your world on every level, not just conscious and subconscious, but I want the floodgates to be open when it comes to money in your life for, yes, the expected and the unexpected. But I started to notice something over the years. I started to notice expected and unexpected only really felt empowering to people that had something expected in the equation. Let me know if this makes sense. Let me know if this resonates with your experience and what you've observed, even with yourself or perhaps with clients, with people you know, or in your life, in your community. But I started to notice when people try to affirm, I open up to it all, expected and unexpected. And yet, even though they were affirming that, there was actually zero expected. There was actually zero consistent revenue. There was actually zero that they could count on or plan on flowing in whatsoever. I started to notice it didn't work so well for people to affirm that when there was nothing expected. I started to observe it didn't feel like it was very effective, and actually left people scared, left people feeling powerless, left people feeling very fragile when all they could depend on and all they felt like they could ask for and believe for was something unexpected. Something unexpected is going to have to show up. Something unexpected is going to have to happen. Something unexpected is going to have to flow in. I started to realize that idea and that openness and that prayer really requires us to have both things working in our favor. That yes, we are open to and calling in all unexpected good that can flow to us now. But we're not relying on the unexpected. We're not dependent on the unexpected. We're not powerless and sitting around waiting, and our only hope lies in the unexpected. I started to realize it makes a world of difference, and it actually opens you up to the most when you have both levels working for you. When there is expected that you feel good about and no ceiling, only infinite possibilities that you are available for with the unexpected. And so I go back to my persuasion here. I just have a belief that every single person is meant to have at least one consistent vehicle for wealth, for money, for provision in every season of their life. I will tell you, family, one thing that has been wonderful for me about partnership is that it has really highlighted how many incredible vehicles exist in the world. I already had seen a lot. I already knew about a lot. But partnership has introduced me to even more. Partnership has just expanded my horizon of that even more. And even before I was doing this show and these teachings in this way, even before there was partnership, for 10 years of being in business, since I was never specifically a business coach, I have been able to work with so many successful people and so many leaders from various spheres and industries and cities, and even that has illustrated for me just how many vehicles there are. I just want to list out a few things just to expand your sense of possibility of the infinite vehicles that exist. And by the way, I truly believe because of technology, because of the age that we live in, because of the access that we have to opportunities and possibilities all around the world in a way that human beings never did before the last 50 years, I truly believe there have never been more vehicles available to each and every one of us than there are right now. That doesn't mean there are not some scary or heavy or challenging things about living in this moment and the world, the planet that we live in right now. But I also have to tell you, family, I truly do believe it is a fact that there are more vehicles available and accessible to every single person out there than at any point in history. A few examples that I have witnessed of the vehicles that are out there and what the right vehicle can do for somebody's life. So I have seen someone be guided to an investment and turn $12,000 into $500,000. I have seen someone write one song and that one song end up being enough to buy them a house or to fund their whole family for life. I have seen someone be able to retire at 19 and bless their parents in a major way because they were guided to the right thing. I have seen someone launch a company, build it for a few years, and then be able to sell it for a massive amount where their entire future and their entire family was stabilized for life because of it. I have seen people find a new income opportunity that they could do from home and do with integrity and start making $1,000 a day their very first week or their very first month. I have seen people come up with one idea through divine inspiration, an unexpected idea, an idea that no one had ever thought of in that way perhaps before, and it turned into $1 million or many, multiples, millions of dollars for them. And I have seen, last but not least, final example, I have seen people discover a business model that I didn't know existed, that I, as a coach and a business owner, was unfamiliar with, that I had never heard of before. But I've seen people find a business model, discover a business model that they felt drawn to, and have it bring in for them and their family $100K, $200K, $300K every single month. And the best part of me sharing all of these and why I wanted to share all of these is I'm not here to sell you an opportunity. I'm not here to lead you into a company. I'm not here to ask if you want to sign up to work for XYZ or to be on XYZ team or to sell this thing or that thing. So I share all of these examples with absolutely no sales pitch, and not to say you should go find this person and duplicate that. You should go find this person and do exactly what they did. So many of these things were individual, unique, divinely directed pathways. But I share all of those examples to reiterate. There are infinite vehicles out there. There are infinite pathways and possibilities and opportunities out there. And you just need one right vehicle to change your season of life. One thing I am declaring for every partner especially, and for every single person watching this teaching, listening to this teaching at any point, it is that if you do not yet have a vehicle that works, a vehicle that supports you, a vehicle that feels good, feels right, feels aligned for you, that God in the days to come, maybe even beginning right now, will guide you clearly and gently and undeniably to the right vehicle for you. And please hear me carefully on this. It's not going to be something that you're going to have to say yes to out of pressure or urgency. It's not going to be something that you're going to need to be pushed into or hard sold into. It's going to be something that God leads you to, that God makes clear, that God gives you a peace about. But I am speaking that as one of my biggest prayers over every single person who listens to this particular teaching, that if you do not already have a vehicle that works for you, that God will guide you to the right vehicle. I view it this way, okay? I live in downtown LA in a major metropolitan area, okay? And if I want to go somewhere, there are so many ways that I can get around. Sadly, I cannot use the Kirby transportation methods that may be happening on my background screen, but there are many transportation methods that I have available. I can use Uber. I can use Lyft. I can use Waymo, which I love. I can use a metro train. I can use a metro bus. I can use the Lucid EVs that my building has available to rent by the hour or by the day. I can walk. I can scooter. There are lots of possibilities. I can bike. I am not even listing all the available options. There are so many vehicles available. But here's the good news. If I want to go somewhere, anywhere, I don't need all of those vehicles. I don't necessarily need the same vehicle my neighbor has. If I want to go somewhere, I just need a vehicle. And this is really what I love so much about this season of doing my work and recording this show and having the relationship that I do with my partners. I'm not inviting people to just imitate me. I'm not inviting people and encouraging people, just copy me and do exactly what I do. This is not about, let's all become this. Let's all do it this way. Let's all work in this exact same industry. I love the diversity of this community. I love that there are so many partners doing so many different things in so many ways. You just need a vehicle. And so I am not blessing you necessarily into a path that looks exactly like mine or like any other partner. I am blessing you into a path that is unique to you and has your name on it. But I want to speak over you this persuasion that I have with utter conviction. In every season of your life, you are meant to have a vehicle that supports you. And by the way, before I share the example that's next in my notes, I want to say, sometimes we get funded by a vehicle in one season, and it doesn't have to be the permanent thing. It doesn't have to be the ultimate highest level destiny thing. It doesn't have to be a lifelong forever commitment kind of thing. But I believe in every season there is a vehicle. There was a vehicle of an internship that got me out to California when I wanted to get out here. And there was a vehicle called Soul Cycle that funded me and fueled me as I put the roots of my business into the ground. And I just believe there are so many vehicles available. And again, I just feel called to reiterate for a second here. Even if you're in a temporary season, the vehicle does not always have to be a permanent one. But even if we're just talking temporary, I really do believe in every season there is a vehicle that is meant to support you, a vehicle that is meant to sustain you, a vehicle that is able to provide for you the expected part of the expected and unexpected equation. And now I want to talk about this word equation for a moment, because just as much as I could say every single person out there is meant to have a vehicle that works for them, I would also equally say, while we're on this idea, everybody is meant to have an equation that makes sense. And I just really want to speak to this for a moment, and I'm going to tell you a story and use an example in a minute, but I really want to say here Faith does not require you to not look at numbers, to not have an awareness of where you're at, or to pay no attention to the equation and to how it feels for you. This wasn't in my notes, but I feel like it's important. I feel like I'm supposed to share this for somebody so that you can hear it from me. When I first opened the doors for partnership and I shared that opportunity and I began doing this work and offering it in this way, I didn't know what was going to happen next with partnership, okay? I didn't have any prior evidence. I didn't have anything from my past to go on. And it was a slow, small, quiet, subtle whisper, we could say, of a start at the very beginning. And I want you to hear this, and God, please speak through me. I pray that you can help me articulate this well. On one hand, I was absolutely moving forward in faith without needing to know all the hows, without knowing what was going to happen next, without knowing how it would all come together. On one hand, I was absolutely moving forward in faith without having the answers, without having the hows, without having a perfect equation figured out. But also, I want to be very clear about this. Not as any kind of I need to brag about this, but to help somebody so you understand what faith does not require. In the midst of doing that and in the midst of moving forward by faith, I still knew my numbers. I still looked at the equation of what it takes to be me and to run everything that I do and to live my life every month. I still paid attention. I still knew where we were at. I still knew what was required. And I was still committed to maintain all of my contracts and agreements and obligations. I was still committed that everybody was going to be paid on time, if not early. In other words, I want you to hear. Yes, I was moving forward by faith, and there was a lot of unknown, and I didn't know how it was all going to work out. But I still knew my numbers, and I still knew one way or another when it came to the overall equation of my life, the overall equation of my needs, the overall equation of my provision, that this is what is required. And this equation will be met, will be satisfied, will be taken care of. And I pray that I'm able to explain this in a way that makes sense today. Faith does not require you to just throw your head in the sand and not look at any numbers and not pay attention to the equation. And I think I'm very passionate about this because there's a lot of spiritual people that I have talked to and known and worked with over the years that I feel like put themselves through extra suffering, needless suffering, unnecessary suffering, because they won't ever look at the equation. And so they have an equation of numbers that doesn't work. They have an equation of numbers that doesn't even have enough in it, much less overflow. They have an equation of numbers that fundamentally does not support them. But instead of looking at that and addressing that and getting into their power, shout out idea number 2, they just want to turn a blind eye. They just want to be in avoidance. They just want to not look at the equation at all. And I don't believe that's necessary. I don't believe that faith requires that or that is the spiritual thing to do. And I pray that this idea can serve somebody today. Let me tell this story. One of my first coaching calls ever, I was talking to somebody and they were telling me that they were offering a particular service online. We're not going to get into the details. That's not important. And, I'll protect privacy. But They were telling me they were offering a specific service online, and they were currently manifesting their goal of $10,000 a month. And thank you, God, for directing me back to this memory and this story, because I feel like this really does illustrate what I was trying to say about the expected and the unexpected, maybe better than anything else. So I remember I'm doing this call, and we're talking about how this person is moving towards a goal of $10,000 months. And so I'm doing my job as a coach. I'm active listening. I'm asking lots of questions. I'm willing, of course, to explore anything and everything with them, from the energetic to the practical, to figure out what do we need, what needs to shift, what could be standing in their way, etc. But in the process of having this conversation, I ask them, okay, tell me what you offer. If I find you online, if I discover you, and I instantly fall in love with your work, and I'm obsessed, and I want to experience it for myself, what are you going to sell me? And they told me, well, what I sell is $27 calls with me. Now, you don't have to be good at math, I think, to figure out that there is a faulty equation here. And if you've been listening to me share this idea and it kind of sounds confusing and vague and like gibberish, and you're like, what are you talking about? Equations, okay? Maybe this example will help give some clarity to it. Because if the only thing you're selling is a $27 call, but you're holding the vision of a $10,000 month. I know this is very basic and very obvious, but go with me here as I use this example. That equation does not make sense. That equation does not work. That equation does not set you up for success. And let me go back now to this idea of expected and unexpected. If you are this person, and you are holding the vision of and moving towards $10,000 months, $10,000 months, $10,000 months, but your only vehicle is $27 calls. Do you see how there is a deep disconnect between the vehicle and the vision? And let me say this carefully. Hear me on this. I understand that on a spiritual level, the vision is always bigger than the provision. And I understand that when we begin with a vision, we often have no idea how we're going to pay for it. And when vision starts speaking to us, we often have no idea how we're going to fund it or where we're going to get the provision. I know all of that. I understand all of that. But the longer you stay on a path, if you're really serious about the vision, what is supposed to happen at a certain point is that the vehicle supports the vision, that the vehicle is connected to the vision, that the vehicle syncs up with, gets aligned with, moves in tandem with the vision. And I will never forget this call, and I will never forget the realization that there was an inherent disconnect here. It was a bad equation. And something had to change for the vehicle to support the vision. Because otherwise, here's where we end up. God, I am open to receive the expected and the unexpected. I am open to it all, right? But the expected is only $27 calls. And even if 10 come in, now we're at $270. And even if 100 come in, we're at $2,700. And your calendar is starting to get very, very, very full. And the vision is still 10,000. And do you see what I mean? That when people don't have a vehicle that works and an equation that makes sense, It limits how much you can receive. Because then we find ourselves in that place I'm describing where it's got to be the unexpected. My vehicle can't do it. My equation can't do it. I don't know how. I have no power. I have no options. I have no power to sell. I have no power to create. I have no power to get there. And we end up in a place continually. I'm not talking about a one-time moment, a one-time crisis, a one-time situation, but people end up living in a place that it has to be the unexpected. That's the only option because I don't have anything expected and I don't have any vehicle and I don't have any equation that works. And I just believe that is not God's highest and best for any of us. And so, of course, I shared with this person at the time of that call, something is going to have to change. Either this is not the right vehicle for you, period, or the way you're doing it, the way you're structuring it, perhaps the way you're pricing it just isn't quite right, and you haven't found the right option yet. But this doesn't align as it currently stands. So one way or another, I remember telling them, something is going to have to change because currently you don't have a working vehicle. And so I don't want to belabor this point here. We've got more ideas to get to, but I really did feel led to thoroughly teach this one today because it is my heart and my prayer for every single person in this community that you would let God guide you to the right vehicle for you in this season and in your life as a whole. And let me just mention one more thing here for anybody that resonated specifically with that piece about I'm in a temporary season and maybe I haven't found my lifelong thing yet. Maybe I don't know what that is yet. Maybe I'm not there yet. But let me just say this. There is a famous concept of finding your zone of genius, right? And I've taught about this. I don't have time to say much about it here, but Dr. Gay Hendricks invented the concept. You can read about it in the book, The Big Leap. There's lots of ideas out there about our zone of genius. Now, I personally think a lot of people have a misunderstanding here. And it becomes an all or nothing thing, right? Like the only thing I should ever be doing is living in my zone of genius. And I don't want to watch the kids. I don't want to take out the trash. I don't want to have to file paperwork. Why should I have to do that? That's not in my zone of genius. And like anything, it doesn't go well when an idea is taken to an unhealthy extreme that the creator of the idea never intended, right? And sometimes I think it turns into this all or nothing of, it better be my zone of genius or nothing. And I'm supposed to be in my zone of genius 100% of the time. And 100% of my income and my money better be coming from my zone of genius, or else I'm out of alignment. I'm out of integrity. And I think this is such a misunderstanding, and it is so silly because as I understand it, Dr. Gay Hendricks was not telling people that it's an all or nothing, and if it's not 100% of your zone of genius, making 100% of your money, give up and throw it away, right? What he was saying is, you want to live in your zone of genius as often as you can, in a healthy and aligned and sustainable way. So do whatever you have to do to support yourself so that you can live in your zone of genius as much of the time as possible in a healthy and aligned and sustainable way. And by the way, there's also these other zones, right, that he talks about. And again, I don't have time to go into all of it, but The zone, for example, right below zone of genius is zone of excellence, which is a category of things that may not be your ultimate purpose, your ultimate calling, your ultimate destiny, but it is a category of things that you do very, very well. It is a category of things that you are very, very gifted in. And it is a category of things that you can get paid for, usually tremendously. And I actually think an underrated idea from the inventor of this zone of genius concept is this principle, not that it's all or nothing and you must be in your zone of genius 100% of the time and 100% of your money must come from there. But actually, he suggests try to move up the levels, try to move up on this scale, and try to live as much of your life in as high of a zone as you possibly can in any one moment or in any one season. And so I just want to share for somebody today. This is not for everybody, but I did feel led to put it in for somebody. Please know that everything you do and everything that is a vehicle for you in any given season of life does not have to be your zone of genius at all times. And your zone of genius does not have to immediately, right away, be 100% funding that is all of your money and all of your provision and enough for all of your life. But what you can do is let whatever you do fund your vision. What you can do is to move as high up on the scale as you can so that, for example, if you are working a job in a temporary season to fund your family, to fund your life, to fund your dream, that what you choose is not in the zone of incompetence, that what you choose is not in the zone of even competence, but that what you choose is at least the zone of excellence. That is a choice you can make. You can choose to live as high as possible on the scale as much of the time as possible. And you can choose to set yourself up not for burnout, but for success so that you can sustainably live in your zone of genius more and more and more as time goes on. I think I've said everything I was meant to share on number 5, but I'm blessing you into the right vehicle for your life, the right vehicle for your future, the right vehicle for the season that you're in even right now. And now I want to move forward to idea number 6. We have a couple left here, family. Idea number 6 that changed my money world forever. And it is this. Write this down, type this out in the comments. Money will serve your hidden agenda until you cancel it out. Money will serve your hidden agenda until you cancel it out. You know, this is something that you realize very early on as you work on yourself, and something that is certainly talked about a lot within the personal development space, okay? Sometimes we say we want one thing, but there is another deeper subconscious want also in the equation. Have you ever experienced that? I know many of you have and are very familiar with this concept. Have you ever suspected that perhaps? Like maybe you can't put your finger on it. You can't quite name it. You can't quite fully articulate what's going on, but you sense, I say that I want this, but I keep not letting myself have it. I say that I want this, but I keep sabotaging. And it feels like That's not an accident. That's not a coincidence. That's not bad luck. It feels like there's something deeper going on. It makes me think of the quote from the movie Halloween Town, where it is said that magic is really very simple. You want something, and then you let yourself have it. You want something, and then you let yourself have it. And of course, the idea behind that quote is that is easier said than done, because so many people want things, but they're not letting themselves have it. What is going on there? Well, Margaret Lynch, who wrote the book Tapping into Wealth, uses the language of hidden agendas. Stefan here. So sorry to interrupt this broadcast, but this teaching simply had too much goodness in it for us to possibly fit it into one YouTube video. And so here's how you can continue listening to this teaching absolutely free. In the episode description here, there is a link to Spotify and to Apple Podcasts. Open this episode, find this timestamp, and resume listening there. I know it takes a little bit of an extra step and some extra work, but I promise you it is 100% worth it for what is to come in the rest of this teaching. So meet me over there on Apple or Spotify. I can't wait to finish teaching and sharing all of this with you.